So the federal government, with the acquiescence of the Nationals, will pledge to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. This is a promise Scott Morrison can pack in his sporran and take to Glasgow. The Highland Games in Scotland, where they all parade their moral superiority, even though nothing practical seems to cut through. It's been clear for a while, of course, that this would happen. So what does it mean, though? Let me give you a few important points, some reality checks. First, this is a major backflip by the coalition government. No matter how they rationalise it now, it's a huge reversal from the stance they took to the last election, when they promised to be cautious in their climate action, promised to hold back from the reckless and uncosted ideas promoted by Labor and the Greens. This stand played a large part in that narrow election win in 2019. So this is a real risk for Scott Morrison. In an instant, he might have undercut a core strength for the coalition. Second, in practical terms, like what it'll do to electricity prices and supplies and electric vehicles and curbs on agriculture and all that sort of thing, this is only going to mean as much as the government wants it to. Because let's expose the big lie here. The big lie perpetrated by the government, Labor, the Greens and most of the media. This absolute nonsense that we can get to net zero with renewables and storage and electric cars. We cannot. Existing technology does not get us to net zero. They know this. The International Energy Agency has said this. So this is in many ways a meaningless promise that will hurt us only as much as the policies bolted onto it by either party. And we don't yet know what they are. So talk about costs at the moment is pointless. No one knows what this will cost us, except it'll cost us a bomb. And the politicians just ignore these practicalities. They pretend renewables will work and they demonise technology that does work. Listen to the New South Wales Treasurer just yesterday.
People talking about nuclear to solve our current needs are chasing a unicorn. It may have a role to play in the future as technology evolves, so I'm not going to rule that out. But right now we're focusing on the things that are going to work, that are going to drive down bills, create jobs and grow our economy.
Unicorns? Has this bloke not heard of France? Its nuclear energy supplies 70% of its electricity and much of Europe's. And it's affordable and it's reliable and guess what? Virtually emissions free. But unicorn emissions, apparently, according to Matt Keane. Matt Keane and his ilk just make up excuses not to embrace nuclear, a form of energy that's going to be expanded not only in France, of course, but in the UK and China and other nations, because they know they can't seriously reduce emissions. They can't get to net zero emissions without nuclear. Quite clearly, the people who believe in unicorns are those who indulge in the make-believe that windmills and solar panels can power us to prosperity, when all the evidence is they do the opposite. The third thing is that we need to be very wary of why this promise has been made. It's not been made in response to your interests. This is not a case of the Australian government deciding this will improve the lives of all Australians. This net zero pledge is happening to appease external voices. The United Nations wants this. The Europeans want this. Joe Biden wants this. Or his team tell him he wants this. Big business and the big financiers, they want this. So Australia has caved in to the pressure. Many of the ministers have effectively admitted this. The government's decided it's in our national interests to cave into all this pressure and go along with the mob. We've given the big corporates, the woke multilateral organisations and the political globalists what they want. China will be happy because this will continue to weaken Western economies and strengthen China, because China faces no encumbrances at all. Now, fourthly, this move also gives licence to the alarmists. The hysterical predictions of the climate catastrophists will ring even louder now, even though none of their predictions have yet come true. Have a look at the 9 entertainment newspapers today. The last chance for humanity is the headline, as we once again are told that this is an emergency and a tipping point. This is not the first time, nor is it likely to be the last time that they say it's our last chance. They use bushfires, floods, droughts, storms, all sorts of weather events to increase the fear and bolster their case. But rest assured, what all the politicians know but never say is that whatever we do with our energy policies, we won't get rid of droughts or floods or bushfires or storms. You'll never notice any difference in your lifetime, and neither will your children. So given all that, what does this mean politically? Is it the end of the coalition government? Well, in some ways it should be. If Labor and the Greens welcomed this backflip, matched the government's climate promises and said the coalition had just validated all of Labor and the Greens' arguments for the past 2 decades, if Labor did that, then the coalition might not have anywhere to go. But the Green left just can't help themselves, can they? Nothing is ever enough for them. And before they even pondered this for a day or two, before Labor even celebrated the coalition's capitulation on net zero by 2050, they've slammed the move. They've said it's not enough. And Labor has targeted the government's unchanged 2030 targets.
Well, we think it should be better than 26 to 28 because 26 to 28 is not enough to hold the world to 1.5 degrees. It is not in keeping with our Paris commitments.
What is?
We need to do better.
Yeah, Labor says we need more action sooner. They promised emission reductions of 45% by 2030. And surely after that sort of outburst, they can't backtrack. So the irony of the net zero 2050 pledge, the net zero 2050 capitulation, is that it actually takes 2050 out of the equation. And the election now is likely to focus on the 2030 targets, a lot closer. The coalition can say it's on track to reach its targets, 28%. What you see is what you get. Labor is going to have to detail more extreme policies, more expensive policies, deeper emissions cuts to get to its higher 2030 target. That'll be just 8 years away at the next election. So thanks to Labor's knee-jerk response, next year's election is still between a coalition climate policy that sure is too much for plenty of its supporters, but it'll be up against a Labor climate policy that's much more radical, more disruptive, more reckless and more costly, focused on 2030. Madness. Come in, spinner.